Hey, you are listening to the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and engaging individuals like yourselves on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I have the privilege of being a writer, podcaster, and the film festival director for our Horrific Hope Film Festival event, which you guys can catch in beautiful Winchester, Virginia, beginning April 29th and 30th. And this episode, once again, is brought to you by Hard Talks and Hard Hats podcast. You have to watch this podcast, Fierce Literature and Ride the Omnibus podcast. You guys can get more information on our lineup for this year's Horrific Hope Film Festival, along with tickets and more on our sponsors. Click the links in the descriptions below. But on this episode, I'm really excited to be bringing you guys this story. He is a podcaster of one of the hosts of Streaming Things podcast, as well as a TikToker. This is the second TikToker we've had on here. His channel is called Movies Are Therapy. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Chris. What's up, man?
How you doing?
I realized I probably should have gotten your last name. Then I was like, we're just throw a Mr. on it. We'll make Chris the last name.
Yeah, Mr. Chris Rudy.
Well, man, thank you so much for taking time out. You're a busy man. Congratulations on the success of TikTok, man. That's actually how I ended up connecting with you. So that's actually where this episode was birthed out of.
Yeah, I really appreciate being invited. I'm still very, very small in the realm of content creation. So whenever somebody reaches out, I'm still tickled to death, and I appreciate it, especially with the subject matter of your show. So thank you.
I kind of want to step before we get into like the heavy stuff of your story. I want to talk for a second, just talking about the podcast and the TikTok channel. So the podcast is called Streaming Things. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the show?
Absolutely, I would love to. That's my baby. We started in, I think it was 2017. So it was originally a Stranger Things fan cast, basically. So it was right before the debut of season 2 of Stranger Things. I've loved pop culture and nerd stuff my whole life. And it's not my first podcast. You know, I've had many, many movie blogs and podcasts and made a bunch of short films. And it's just my whole life's been surrounded by that. So I called my buddy up who does all my stuff with me. And I was like, man, I think we should start a Stranger Things show, and we could call it Streaming Things. And then if it does well, the title is vague enough that we could kind of branch out and talk about other movies and shows. And so it did, marginally well. So we had less success with the off seasons. So we kind of let it die until season 3 came out. And then, had a big boom for season 3, had a bunch of fans and stuff, and some personal upheaval kept us away from the show after season 3 went off the air. We tried a few other things that didn't do as well. And about a year and a half ago, I guess, we were reading through a lot of the old emails, and some fans had reached out and said that they were re-listening to old episodes and the show meant a lot to them. So we got together, the 3 of us, it's me, Steve, and Andy, and we were like, man, we should start doing the show again. And then at the time we thought season 4 should be out soon, for sure, right? It's been over a year. We didn't know it'd be about 3 years before season 4 would come out, but it's finally coming out soon. So we've been every week, a weekly podcast for the last year and a half or so, steadily. And we got a Patreon page. So if you guys are into TV and film, you should definitely check it out. We have a lot of fun. And if you're a huge fan of Stranger Things, season 4 is finally dropping on May 27th. So we'll get back to our roots here shortly.
And it's going to be a 2-part season. You get one in May, and the second part's in July. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's May 27th. And then the part 2 is July 1st. If I'm not mistaken.
It's wild to me. So I am curious, about the podcast about Stranger Things. Like, did you guys just stick to television, or did you guys kind of get into like the extended lore with the comics and the novels too?
So with Stranger Things specifically?
Yeah.
So our shtick is that, and that's why it's tough, and because it's Netflix, so everything drops all at once. I'm really grateful it's in 2 parts. Actually, it makes it so much easier on us. So we do a complete deep dive into every single episode. And so when they debut, I'm on the East Coast, and so they don't drop until 3 a.m. So the three of us had to meet up at 3 a.m., watch the episode, and then hop on the microphones. And it takes a couple hours to record the episode because we try to find all the Easter eggs and, completely walk through every bit of the plot, make predictions, have a great time. Steve does a bunch of Dr. Brenner impersonations and stuff. He's great. It's super fun. And then we go watch the second episode and then come back on the microphone. So it takes, 10, 11, 12 hours all the way through the night to get 5 or 6 episodes out. And then we just kind of peter them out throughout the week. And then what's tough, and people love it. A lot of the huge fans of the show have a lot of fun, especially with how much we love the characters. But then when we started branching out, we didn't know what to do, because that was like, we picked apart Stranger Things as much as possible. And so, but nobody else loved the show that we chose next as much as Stranger Things. You know what I mean? Like, we had found a fan base that also loved Stranger Things, but then it was like, let's do Black Mirror or Altered Carbon. And then like the listeners would fall off because they don't necessarily like that show. Right. So it became this like, what do we do now kind of thing. So we've opted, in the interim of Stranger Things seasons, we have a section where we talk about anything we've been watching in general that's streamable recently. And then we review a big movie, usually whatever came out in theaters that week or something. And that seems to be working pretty well. And there's a core fan base of people, but not as big as when Stranger Things is brand new. That's when we're best. We could have been a big show, but I screwed it up. It's kind of a funny story. When season 3 came out, we got an email, and that's why I was kind of telling you I'm a little suspicious of the internet, right? When you reached out to me to be on this show, I was like, oh, hey. So I got an email inviting us to be on the news in Canada. And they say, hey, you're one of the biggest Stranger Things podcasts. We want you to come on the primetime news tonight and talk about the new season that's dropping, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, right. So I was kind of an ass, and I replied, what's this all about? In reference to the Canadian origins, because I thought it was spam. And it turns out I had a weird feeling a few minutes later, and I Googled her name, and she was like the Barbara Walters of Canada. And, and I was like, oh no, no. I'm like frantically emailing her, like, actually, I'm really sorry, and trying to tell her. And she's like, it's fine, but we're all booked up now. And so all of our competition was invited to that news segment. But I was like, guys, I'm so sorry. And they were like, no, it's fair. It's fine.
I get those types of emails.
I do
all
stuff
the time.
like that frequently to shoot myself in the foot.
I get emails like that all the time, so I 100% understand it. Especially when something like that, you're just like, oh man, like this sounds a little bit too good to be true. Some of my good friends now, right, that been doing podcasting, I messaged him last year. I randomly came across this podcast. I was like, dude, would love to sit down with you guys, and we've done many collaborations over the last year. And he was like, nah, this is not real. And I was just like, I'm a super small podcast, bro. Like come on. But man, I can't imagine a Canadian news site like that.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I was like, it's not even the same country. I'm like weirded out right now. And I get, and anyone who's in the creator space knows when you're frequently publishing your email addresses and stuff in public spaces, you get a lot of scammers and trash. And so almost when you're small, that's almost all you get. So it's like, I was really skeptical. And it's a regret. I deal with it a lot now that I've got a little bit of a following on TikTok. It's just my email address is right there, just in case anybody wants to have any kind of business inquiry. So I get a lot of people trying to trick me. So luckily my co-host is in IT, so I kind of run things by him. And when you reached out, even I looked around at your Twitter page, your TikTok, checked out the podcast before I responded, just because you never know.
That's fair, man. But that's free listens for us. So I'm not complaining.
No, for sure. And I like your show. I like what you're doing. I really respect the mission, for sure. There's a lot of podcasts out there, and it's rare when you find a unique idea, and even my show, it's just 3 white dudes talking about movies. Like that's been done before, but we just love it so much we can't help it. But so I respect what you're doing.
Well, thank you for your kind words. And definitely the platform that I know you best from is TikTok. The channel's called Movies Are Therapy, and I love that title. And I am curious how much of that title and that handle like ties into your story. Um, but yeah, it's kind of like a collection of just like, and I don't know how would you best describe your TikTok?
Well, the tagline is movie news, reviews, and bad jokes, and I think that describes it pretty well. And that's just my personality as well. The title ties heavily into my life. I was kind of raised by a television in a sort of cable guy esque way, right? But I didn't try to kidnap Matthew Broderick or anything. But other than that, it's kind of what it was. I sat in front of the box. I didn't have any friends until I was a teenager, and then I went through a period of homelessness and semi-homelessness where I have memories of living in an abandoned apartment with the electricity coming from a neighbor's house, and I only had like some drugs and 4 or 5 DVDs and a TV to my name. I had a couch pulled into the kitchen because that's where there was the least amount of bed bugs, and just watching Lord of the Rings and Goodwill Hunting and The Unborn, a random horror movie I had at the time, over and over and over. It's just because that's all I had. And I just and there was a big moment in my early addiction when I had pawned my entire DVD collection, which at the time was probably 700 or 800 DVDs, and I was
Jeez.
19, so that meant a lot to
Sure.
me. And um, when I got home, I can distinctly remember being like, shit, because all I like to do is get resorted to getting rid of the movies in order to get my fix. But now, like, what am I going to do now? Because I didn't have any of the movies. And I was like, I didn't think that one through. And that sounds dumb to most people. You'd think the movies would be the first thing to go. But for me, that was like, oh, shit, rock bottom. But it got lower for a couple more years, unfortunately. But so yeah, I mean, the movies are therapy thing is very serious to me because I've learned how to be a better father. It may sound stupid to some people, but better father, better friend, and a lot about myself from watching film and TV shows. And I think it's super. I think it's the highest art form, and not to gush too poetically about movies and stuff, but you combine writing and photography and music and theater. They're all on full display in a film, and that's why I love it so much.
Well, I think with that, I just spill the beans. Chris is actually here to talk about his uh drug addiction past, and I think with stories like this, obviously we know how the story ended and how it's continuing to evolve from day to day. Those that follow you on whether podcast or it's TikTok or whether people are just now hearing the story can go see the evidence of that stuff. But I think the stories like this they always begin in childhood in some ways. And I'm wondering if you can kind of talk up a little bit about your childhood. You hit it on it when I asked about the TikTok, talking about how, you were really alone and you felt like you kind of were raised by the television.
Sure. I think I've been in recovery now since March 15th, 2012. So I know hundreds of people with quality sobriety. And it's interesting that, there's stories, there's a lot of similarities in the same low points and high points a lot of the time, but they're very varied at the same time. I know rocket scientists that work at Wright Pat Airport, Air Base, and I know doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs, and then I know a lot of my people too, like the waiters and the restaurant managers and the convicts and everybody in between. And some people have had two parents who love each other and are still married their whole life, and some people were abused in their childhood and have terrible stories. So I don't know where alcoholism and addiction comes from. I know that the trauma can play a huge part in it for sure. I had a really good childhood in many ways. Both of my parents, they were never married, but they were together until my late teens. And I never doubted that they loved me. ever. And I think that that's huge. And I know people who are otherwise very well off didn't have that. They were very loving. They hugged me. I kissed my dad on the mouth when I was a little boy, and I think that that's part of the reason why I'm so sensitive. And a lot of the things that I like about myself came from that kind of upbringing. Um, I didn't find out that we were extremely poor until like middle school. And you know what I mean by that? Like they kind of,
Sure.
I don't know if it's because I'm a kid or they hid it from me or a combination of both, but I kind of recognized weird things, but I didn't put two and two together. Like we get clothes from the church and the Christmas presents come from the church. And that's just, it is what it is. When you're a kid, you don't give a shit. You're like, all right, whatever. I'm
Yeah.
wearing girls softball sweatpants to school because that's what, they gave my mom for me to wear. And fine, sure. My peanut butter, I have to stir it up first, or because all the oil rises to the top and like state peanut butter. My cereal comes in a bag. Everybody else's is in a bag in a box. Other than that, everything's normal. So, but my parents love me a lot. But anyway, it all kind of came to a head in like middle school. I came home from school, and there was cops surrounding the apartment, and we grew up in these like brown brick apartments, and I lived there for the first 15 years of my life. And my dad was getting arrested, and my mom was trying to scramble around and get all kinds of paperwork and stuff. And apparently he had some warrants from a previous life that finally caught up to him. And this kind of blew my mind because my dad was like this real quiet, stern man who he was a stonemason. So he always worked really hard, came home exhausted, and then he would read all night. He just loved reading, which is where I got that from. And in the morning, get up at 5 a.m. and read the newspaper and do crosswords and then go to work. So I was like, what? It turns out my dad was from a really rough neighborhood in Cincinnati, Ohio, called Price Hill. And, had been on the street since he was 15, then went to the Army at 17. And then when he came home, he went to prison from the Army for beating up a sergeant in Leavenworth military prison for 2 years, and saw terrible things there because, that was in the 60s. And then, so he was just a really rough, violent guy for most of his life before I was born. He traveled the country doing crazy stuff like 3-card Monte. I don't know if you know what that is, or red card, but you take like 2 black playing cards and 1 red one, and you basically hustled truckers and stuff across the country. Yeah. Right. And he was just like you could make a Paul Newman movie out of it. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know nothing about my dad. Like he was just real quiet, stern guy, pretty funny if you could get him to ease up a little bit, honestly. But he had some charges, and he spent most of his early life in prison. I didn't know any of this, sold cocaine and stuff. Didn't know any of this because when I was born, he gave all that up and decided to be a different kind of person and learn a trade. And he became a construction worker. And I wasn't born until he was like 37. So he had already lived more of a than I've lived now before I was even born. And, my mom was from a small like country town called Somerset, Kentucky. So she was the other side of the culture, just a really sweet lady, but she was bipolar. And so she was more interested in being my friend than my mother. And that'll come into play later because when my dad, I was probably 12 or 13. Now my dad's in prison. He's who I'm terrified of disappointing. Right. And so he's gone. Now it's just my mom. So I grew my hair out. I started wearing Nirvana shirts and flannel and ripped up jeans and playing guitar, coloring my nails with Sharpie, and just kind of being an ass and acting out. And now I never had any friends at all up to this point. I didn't really even care. I played by myself with Ninja Turtle toys and read Harry Potter books and giant fantasy tomes. I was obsessed with reading fantasy books and watching TV. Didn't want to hurt anybody ever. But now that he was gone, I was running around the neighborhoods with like other rocker kids, just being an asshole, and I was really angry. I didn't really know why, but I started to realize that I was poor. And like, I was smart. My family were good people. Why didn't we have stuff? And so I started just kind of terrorizing neighborhoods and like pushing full pool furniture into people's pools and stuff, like, you got a pool. I'm angry at that. Why do you have a pool? I want a pool. So anyway, all of that is to say, my mom and my older brother were hanging out one night. My dad's still locked up, and they're drinking alcohol. And my mom was drinking Bailey's Irish Cream out of these little like hotel bottles, little tiny airplane shots. and she gave me one. And I guess I asked for it. I don't even remember, but I remember drinking it. It was like alcohol chocolate milk. I was probably 13 or so. And I felt great. My belly warmed up. I was giggling. Me, her, and my brother were all laughing. And none of the stress of rent or any of the crap we were always worried about was coming to mind at all. We were just having a good time watching a movie. And I was like, I want to feel like this all the time, and it kind of saved my life. And I think that's what people who aren't alcoholic might not know is like, we've got issues way before we take the first drink. And the alcohol actually solves that problem. You know what I mean? That might otherwise lead to being destructive and violent and depressed. Now I was just drunk. So this is obviously the better alternative. And in many ways, it really is. So alcohol is the solution to a deeper problem that I had until it stopped. But so then I found a group of kids that like to drink, and about 14 years old probably, and did as much as I could, as often as I could.
It's crazy to think about. I think you might be the first person I've ever sat across from having a conversation like this, and hearing that there was a sound home life for the majority of your childhood. Because usually it's the first, it's kind of reversed where it's like, oh, I grew up, I was neglected, or my mom was I grew up, one parent home, and they were always working, and I was like shuffling around babysitters, different people. But it's interesting to kind of hear that. And also, I've never heard alcohol been put that way. It's an interesting perspective to have, but it is, I think from the way that I've always kind of looked at it at alcohol, not to say that I don't drink, but those that drink in order to get drunk, you're trying to ignore those problems. But it is a safer alternative, you're right, to, the violence or destruction that we can have within us because we're pissed at life circumstances.
Yeah. And I'm in a 12-step program. That's how I got sober. And, they say a lot that people who relapse, it's complicated, but basically you situate your life in such a way that you have no choice but to drink. And what that means is, for somebody in recovery, me, I haven't drank in 10 years, but that doesn't mean that I'm a saint, right? So in order to stay sober, I have to do a lot of things on a daily basis that are ingrained in me now, but I can still make bad choices, harm other people, or act out, or be dishonest, right? Those kinds of things weigh on me now. And if I continue to do those behaviors, I will either drink or consider suicide, right? Just because of whatever it is that's wrong with me, whatever you want to call alcoholism, those are the thoughts that I have. And so rarely do I even ponder drinking, because that's where I know, and I know what that'll lead me to, but in my darkest moments, it's the other thing that kind of crops up as a possible solution. Right. So, but then again, I have, luckily a good support network where I have coping skills. Like, okay, this is the action that needs to be taken. Then, I call my sponsor and then journal a little bit or whatever. And then ultimately go help someone else. That's the 12th step. Nothing so much ensures immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. And so that's the thing that keeps the drink at bay more than anything, is helping people who are just now trying to get sober and doing things like this.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so I don't know, full disclosure, listeners, I don't know the age difference between Chris and myself. I grew up in the era of Warped Tour, kind of like at its like peak, where you had like Under Oath, Devil Wears Prada, August Burns Red, like those heavy bands. And I know for me, like a lot of my angst got wrapped up in that music. And so I'm wondering, as we're kind of diving back into your story, talking about, you being a 13, 14-year-old, and did you find that like music kind of matched, were you actually like talked about like Nirvana and like the rock, like if you were sober or weren't like to the point where you would say that like call drunk, would you find that like music was kind of like the other alternative to kind of coax that anger?
Absolutely. I played guitar, like I said, and I was in a couple bands. I was a grunge guy. I think I'm 33 now, so I think we're about the same age. Um, but
I'm 31, so
yeah, well, yeah, we're about there. So I wasn't the Warped Tour guy though. I was into like Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots and the Toadies and Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Tool later on, and then I went through a metal phase when I was 15 or 16, just because of those guys are so good at the guitar, and I was a guitarist, So, but anyway, yeah, I mean, absolutely, I was obsessed with that. I thought I was going to be a novelist or a rock star. Like those were the only two options, right? That's what I was doing all the time, and so, but that meant that I could drink and do drugs the way that I wanted to. Both of those professions, it was like acceptable. It was expected, and that's what I thought. That's what I kept myself from realizing how badly I was abusing substances, because that's what everybody I idolized did. I wanted to drink all day, and snort all night and just play music and rock out and party. That's what everybody at least that's what I thought. That's what they were advertising, at least. So we would have these big jam sessions and these like shithole houses with drums and amps set up everywhere, and mirrors with powder on them getting passed around, and beer cans everywhere. And it was just like, this is what people like us do. We're not drunks, we're not junkies, we're just artists. That's what I thought. So I hid that from myself for quite a while.
Wow, I've never actually read the book that this movie is based on. The Netflix movie The Dirt, which is the Motley Crue biopic, really kind of depicted just the debauchery that band did in their early years. And I love one of the subtle like fourth wall break moments in that movie is these guys were rock stars solely because these guys thought this is what rock stars do. You blow up hotel rooms, you prank people, you get really drunk, really wasted, and you sleep all hours of the day, party all hours of the night. Going back to like even the 70s, Kiss had a song that said, "I want to rock and roll all night and party every day." And that kind of became the anthem for the 80s and 90s generation, as far as, going to these like hair metal shows and grunge shows and eventually raves. And what I am kind of curious, like, how did you kind of come to that like realization that like this is what rock stars do, like this is the lifestyle that I want to live and I can do it by doing this?
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in this show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
I don't know that I ever consciously thought about it, and it's funny how alcoholics kind of find each other, I guess, because I had a core group of 5 or 6 buddies, and we were all drinking and using the way that I like to. And so you get this, what's the word? There's an expression that when you hang out with people that have all the same ideas as you, an echo chamber, right? So it was just like, we're all doing this. This is all normal. And luckily I was apparently a shitty musician, because I probably would have died if I had the money and the people enabling me that major artists have. I don't think I would have gotten sober. But I was a huge Kurt Cobain head. It's cliche, but I mean, I was obsessed with Kurt, and I knew he had a problem with heroin and mental illness. And for some reason that made me love him more, and probably at the young age that, my young age is why I idolized even that. It never occurred to me that everybody I was obsessed with died in their late 20s. It was just, that didn't occur to me. I just still wanted what they had, and their defiance of authority. And that's what it felt like too. Every time I smoked a joint or snorted, it felt like a defiance of authority, of status quo, and really I was just her, that's what, and nobody has proper drug education in schools. I don't want to say nobody, but I didn't experience it. All we had was DARE. So nobody came up to me and was like, hey man, drugs are really fucking fun, but here's what happens later. They all just said, you smoke a joint and you're going to shoot heroin the next day, And so I smoked a joint, terrified, and I was looking around, and all I did was eat a bunch of Cheetos and fruit snacks and have a great time. And I was like, they lied to me. What else are they lying about? Maybe cocaine's not that bad, So we got some of that. And I was like, this is pretty cool too. They fucking lied to us, But so there needs to be an honest discussion of, hey, yeah, this shit is fun. That's why people do it. But here's what happens later. Maybe. I don't know if I answered your question, but
yeah, no, it kind of reminds me like, talking specifically about like the drug, how we handle like drugs within the walls of schools. It kind of reminds me of the scene from Mean Girls where Coach Carr is kind of talking about sex, and he's like, don't ever have sex, don't have it standing up, don't have it in missionary position. If you have sex, you will die.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of like we expect that, like DARE. I know my wife and I were talking about this about a year ago. Like DARE didn't necessarily stop kids from wanting to do drugs. Like if anything, it was now the forbidden fruit, and they kind of like a curiosity like really peaked in. Growing up in a conservative Christian household, like horror movies were always the forbidden fruit, and now they're my favorite genre. And so like, there's something that's like internally within us that when we're told no, it's almost kind of like our reaction is, but why?
Sure. Yeah, I think I was born and I don't analyze this a lot because it's kind of like, doesn't matter. It is what it is. My dad used to say it is what it is. Right. And I think that that's a good tactic with my alcoholism. I know what the solution is. So I don't need to examine if it's hereditary or what's going on with that. Right. But it kind of seems like I was born in a perfect storm in the post-Reagan era. Right. The war on drugs is in full swing, which is a terrible tactic that has just exacerbated the issue, in a logarithmic way. That's just appalling.
Absolutely.
And not just that, but I'm sure you're familiar with the Oxycontin epidemic with Oxy Purdue and what happened with opioids in this country. And I was and did you say you were from Virginia?
I live in Virginia. I'm originally from Baltimore.
Okay.
So
okay.
Yeah, I understand the opioid epidemic.
Yeah. So, right as I'm doing cocaine as much as I can, but I'm a kid, I don't have much money, so it's nothing really crazy. And so I talked about my family dynamic, that kind of disintegrated right as I was about 14, 15. So my dad came home from prison. He discovered his, his chubby, nice nerd kid that he was going to use to break the cycle of his family. Had his hair grown out and he was playing guitar and he was smoking weed and smoking cigarettes. And he was like, oh, damn it. So he kind of gave up, took a step back. My dad liked to smoke weed. He and my mom decided that I was going to do it anyway. So you might as well keep us safe. Me and my friends, let them smoke in the house. Right. So my dad would give us weed and he hated alcohol, but my mom was bipolar. So she would sneak us vodka and beer behind my dad's back, so I was allowed to do that in my house, and my friends would all come over and we'd all party there. Because my parents were like, they're going to party anyway. Let's at least keep an eye on them. I see what they were thinking. It just wasn't the best idea. Right. So I'm doing all that every single day. I mean, it was literally, I'd get up ready for, 6 a.m. for school or whatever. And my dad would be smoking a blunt, getting ready for work, and he would pass it to me and I'd hit it and then get on the bus, and he taught me the love of reading. And when you love reading, school is super easy because everything's in words. So I graduated high school with a 4.0 and a pretty serious cocaine addiction, amongst some other things. My mom had cancer, so she had a big shoebox of pills, and I would steal them. Anything that said don't drive or may cause drowsiness, I'd take them to school, and I would just snort them and see which ones worked and which ones didn't. I didn't even know what they were. And sometimes my nose would start shooting blood on the desk or whatever, and I'd go and like, oh, not that one, no more of those pills. And so it sounds crazy now because it is, but I just felt I had found my talent, if that makes sense. Nobody ever accepted me is what it felt like. So I always liked to be the class clown, but now I was kind of like the crash test dummy. And I had this reputation for being like crazy. You know what I mean? He'll do it. He took 30 Robitussin tablets at 7 a.m., on the bus. He's like tripping balls in English class. That dude's crazy. And I liked that. And it felt like I was being accepted for something. And I had I don't know if I was born with it or what, a weirdly high tolerance for substances. Other people would drink and it would make them feel sick or whatever. I could gargle, Everclear in high school. It was like a sideshow talent. It didn't bother me. And so obviously I drank large amounts and did lots of mixed a lot of weird stuff. And anyway, so that's the climate I'm in. I'm doing all that stuff as much as I can. I love ecstasy. I'm having a good old time. I'm not hurting anybody. I moved out of high school as soon as I could. As soon as I got out of high school, I moved and got my own apartment with a buddy of mine, a studio apartment. We were just doing outrageous things, having a great time. And then somebody gave me Oxycontin, because we tried everything, anything that was available, I would try it. And, everybody probably knows what happens next, right? So they were cheap and everything I wanted, Oxycontin gave me. I was an English and philosophy double major in college, and I would snort one of those pills. And I hesitated because I don't know if anybody knows this, but what you had to do was take a hose clamp, like from a car, but a clean one, like a brand new one, and break a piece of it off. And you could shave the pill into like a cocaine pile, right? So an Oxy 80, like an OC 80 was enough for like a whole day or multiple days, in the beginning. So everybody I knew was carrying a hose clamp in their pocket, and I could read, Kierkegaard and Richard Dawkins and all kinds of dense texts and snort that stuff all day. And I just felt like Superman, and all of a sudden it seemed like out of nowhere, they were $80 a piece instead of 15. And then they were impossible to get. And so that's when, the dope sickness and the withdrawal and the crime and all that stuff came out of nowhere for me, just because it was abundant and normal until it was rare and seedy out of nowhere, and the rest is just, I felt that I had no control over what happened next. I had no choice, is what it felt like.
I want to back up a little bit to your father being released and coming back into your life and kind of setting the stage for what would no doubt kind of be your view on life for the next 5 to 10 years. Did you kind of find that, with that mentality of, whether it's the sideshow stuff or smoking joints with your father at 6 a.m., did you kind of find that like it was, now that it was open, it was kind of like just a smorgasbord, like as much as I can handle kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was definitely as much as I could handle. Who knows what undiagnosed mental illness my dad had, because he had a raging temper and a bunch more trauma than I can even imagine, much less describe to someone else. And then my mom was on lithium for bipolar. So they took her off that because of her stomach cancer eventually. And that's when things got really weird for her. But yeah, I mean, I could never get enough. I have a disease of more, and I'm still that way, but I have learned a way to kind of utilize it in a positive way. So I'm prone to workaholism. My first job in sobriety, I became the general manager in a year and then a regional manager, but I was also working 80 or 90 hours a week, and I was obsessed and I was always doing it. And it kind of tore apart, my first sober little family that I made. And so I'm prone to that. And, food addictions, any kind of processed addictions too, like sex addiction, all that stuff it has nothing to do. It's not alcohol, right? It's more that I have an issue with. Anything that feels good or takes me out of myself, I'm excessive with it, even shopping and stuff, when I had some money, that's another thing that I do. If I just want to feel better, anything to temporarily feel better. So, but at first, my first love was drugs and alcohol, and mostly weed. I loved weed. I have a horrible temper too, just like my dad. A lot of anxiety. And, my dad was the funniest guy when he was smoking. He was so clever and he had so many good stories. He'd been all over the world and done crazy stuff. And he was a terror without it. And so, yeah, I mean, that taught me my dad literally said to me, and I idolized him. I can remember crying. I was probably 16. I was crying over a girl at school. And my dad came into my room with his little weed tray. I don't know if you ever smoked, but he was old school. So he had like a tray with like hemostats and papers and stuff. And it was like a 70s thing to have like a whole tray kit thing. He came in with that and he rolled a joint. He's talking to me like a father would. And he said, "Son, I can't tell you what to do. Just promise me you'll smoke this before you decide, because I want you to have a clear head." Right. And those are words my father said to me because he thought emotions clouded your thinking, right? And that weed was a medicine that would clear that up, and that's, so I believe that, it was we were a self-medicating family for sure. And so, but I also feel like when I say I had a troubled home life, that because you asked me at the beginning of the show, I just don't feel like that's true, even though I'm aware there's some weird shit that went on later. My life was leave it to Beaver until I was about 12. And then it just kind of all fell apart. Or at least the facade fell apart. My dad was always stressed. He always knew what was going on. But so, yeah, I mean, I definitely had a weird view of things as far as drugs and alcohol were concerned. Yeah.
You mentioned like your teenage years, like talking about drinking and smoking and then snorting. Kind of where did cocaine kind of fit into that gradual progression? Because it's you talked about more, and it's kind of been my understanding when I've had conversations like these, that those that tend to have like a gateway, which sounds like that's what alcohol was to you, and then it progressed into weed, then it progressed into like harder things. Is that kind of true for you?
Yeah, I mean, my first drink, like I said, was that Bailey's Irish Cream, and then my mom would occasionally buy us some Skoal vodka and cheap beer. But when you're 15, you're 14, alcohol is harder to get than hard drugs, because the government and not to get political, but let's just say it's related, that the government legalized and regulates alcohol. And so it's much harder to get, whereas drugs are all illegal and illicit. And so they're very easy for kids to get. So, weed was easy because nobody's allowed to have it. So I can just go buy it from any drug dealer. Right. And then by extension, a lot of those drug dealers also have other drugs. So it's like, hey, do you want any Xanax or Valium or Percocet or Vicodin or acid or mushrooms? And yeah, I would like all of that because I don't know what any of that does, and I would like to find out, And so by the time I was 15, I had done any drug you could think of, at least once. And I was obsessed with knowing what things felt like, and we would make bongs and all the different stuff. I just want to feel everything. I want to experience everything. I also wanted to go to Paris and to skydive and to write a novel, right? So it was the same mentality that I can use in a positive way. It just happened to be destructive in that time because I wanted to see what all these drugs felt like. And I found a core group of people that agreed with me. Let's get some of those. And most of those guys are dead or sober. Only one of them, ended up not being alcoholic. I don't know. He's just a crazy kid, I guess. But like I said, it's kind of weird that we find each other.
How did life change for you moving from kind of this controlled party environment with your parents into being a adult now, graduating from high school and living on your own, to kind of what also sounds like just a more chaotic party life?
Yeah, it very quickly, like I said, as soon as I moved out, I'd been to jail twice. Once as a minor, I was like 15, and that was before I started drinking, really, really diving heavily into the substance use. That was like what's the word, graffiti, things like that, right? It was just that kind of shit that I was doing before I just calmed down with my drugs. So I went to juvie for a couple of days, and then I spent one night in the drunk tank at 18 years old, right after I graduated high school, and it was the day before I moved out. And my dad bailed me out, and he was like, "You're still moving out?" He was so furious because he wanted to protect me. And so, everything was already deteriorating before I'd even made it to college because it's unsustainable, the life that I was living, And we used to have these giant house parties. There probably 70 or 80 people. And I just became obsessed with that life. And kind of, I've always been a fantasizer, and, I love stories, right? You do too, right? Like you love horror movies. And I was able to kind of craft my own story. And I think everybody does this to some degree without realizing it. And when you break that down, it's all bullshit. Like when you talk about, just be yourself, most people don't even know what that means, right? So I crafted like this version of myself I wanted people to see, because I was always terrified. I was always nervous and worried, but I crafted this like fearless, confident, funny person. And so I loved going to these parties and, busting in the door and chugging bottles and, having all these drugs and, and everybody can have some, it's cool, kind of guy. And none of that was me, it was all bullshit. I was terrified. And, so I wanted to stay there, right? Because when I got home, when I was alone, when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw the same scared shitless kid that I've always been. And I hated that person, right? So the only alternative is to not come home. So you hop from one party to the next and you stay with the weirdos that are up for doing more drugs and staying up all morning. And then eventually everybody would start going to work or go to class. And I'm like, what are you doing? Let's keep going. This party was amazing. And so people started kind of looking at me funny. Like, what do you mean? We've been doing it for 12 hours. I got to go to work now, or everybody. I can distinctly remember, stepping over passed out people and going through, half empty beer bottles and, talking to the one other alcoholic there, like, where can we get some Coke? Or, it's just, now the party's over. Everybody else that's normal has gone home or went to sleep. And I'm still up because I don't want to be me. What do you mean it's over? So I realized that, but I got really heavily into like ecstasy and like a party scene, electronic music culture, EDM, dubstep had just been invented at that time. Like Rusko and Dat Sick and Bass Nectar, those guys had just come out, and so I was doing a lot of ecstasy, and that is a stimulant, and normally I like downers, like weed, alcohol, and opiates. So I was able to stay awake, and again, I like to read, so I'm still doing really well in college, but my professors are looking at me funny because I'm showing up. I had to be this really weird, like waltzing into class, with the Red Hot Chili Peppers blaring and, Blood Sugar Baby. And, but then I would ace the test and be really polite to them, because my parents still raised me to be an upstanding character or whatever, like a polite person. So it was just a weird dichotomy. So I progressed through life without those consequences that are necessary for change, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, until it was too late. Once my dad went back to prison when I was 19, him and my older brother got caught cultivating and trafficking marijuana. And again, another result of, bad decisions on his part, most stuff being illegal. It's annoying to me. And so now I'm furious, right? My mom at this point, her cancer's so bad that she's on oxygen, and she's got to like take her oxygen tubes out to smoke her Winston like 100 so she doesn't catch on fire. And it's just like miserable to look at her, because that's my mommy, you know what I mean? And she's a nice lady too. And so why does she deserve that? So now I'm angry. If there is a God, I'm furious that this is a situation at all, right? And I'm just mad all the time. And so now I've got this opiate addiction that's very expensive. I mean, it takes a couple $100 of drugs a day to keep me from feeling ill. And so the only thing that supports a habit like that, unless you're a Wall Street broker or a successful rock star, neither of which fit my description, is crime. And I'm not suited for crime. I'm not a fighter. I don't like to hurt anybody, and I don't know how to do anything criminal, but I did have a school mentality. So I had a brain and would just research things. And I tried everything you can think of, and terrible drug dealer because I do them all. So that was out the window. And so it just progressed really quickly, man. Breaking into cars and things like that, for the next 3 or 4 years. Eventually I became an intravenous user. I shot heroin. That only lasted for a couple years. And I went from house to house to house. I used up all the goodwill of my friends, and I kept finding people that thought that I was a good kid who needed a leg up. You know what I mean? People would kind of pity me. So friends that had good homes. Chris's dad's in prison. His mom's sick. Eventually my mom died, and that was an easy pity party, right? So a couple people took me in, and I betrayed their trust and got kicked out, and I'd go the next thing. And eventually I was straight homeless, and not like under the bridge homeless. I think I didn't have a home. It was just, I'd sit at the bus stop for 12 or 14 hours until I'd find somewhere to sleep. Right. And I did that for years. Usually it's other barely not homeless junkies that you can stay with. And so I was associating with the only people that would hang out with me were career criminals and other addicts. And so I was just kind of pretending like I was one of them, I guess is what it felt like, because I got to sleep here, So I've just put myself in terrible situations. And the whole time it's bizarre. I feel like the little chubby kid who's obsessed with Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, right? But I'm climbing through this window on this guy's behest who just got out of prison because he told me to get in there and grab some stuff. You know what I mean? And it's just bizarre. It was otherworldly. And but then the more things that you do to get your fix that cause you to hate yourself, because you still have that ingrained morality, right? You're born, I believe, with the knowledge of right and wrong, the fundamental idea of God that lies within every man, woman, and child. And so you just hate yourself more. So you got to drink more to bury that new guilt. And then it's just this, what they call the vicious cycle, right? So.
And at what point during this span of criminal activity is college. Did you
Yeah,
actually
right.
graduate
No,
or like,
no.
oh, okay. At
I
what
was
point
there
did
for
you,
5 years, 2006 to 2011. Um, and it's kind of like you can see the transcripts. It's like straight A's, AABA, AABB, WWAW, right? So I started withdrawing from classes. When I knew I would get a bad grade, I just would withdraw. But I kept going because they were, I had scholarships and stuff. And then I would take loans out to just get high on. I didn't like to work or anything. A lot of people, when they tell their story, like, oh, I always kept a job. That was not me. I was not a worker. So yeah, when it was all said and done, I think I took out like 32 grand in loans over the few years that I was in college. And that was all for drugs. I didn't, it wasn't tuition or anything. So, but yeah, I mean, I was in and out of class, but it just, like I said, the Oxycontin thing that happened in like my first year of college. And so I was a full blown street junkie, basically, for lack of a better word, by like my third year in college. That wasn't even, and I was still trying to so by the third year, it was just a complete mess. I wasn't even showing up for class anymore. I was just signing up for classes to withdraw and then get the money. To this day, I've never gone back and gotten my degree. I think I was just one semester away from a double bachelor's. But yeah.
and what were you taking at just out of curiosity, like what were you majoring in?
Yeah. So English and philosophy. It was a double major. I wanted to be in, I wanted to sell a novel. By this point, I'd given up the rock star dream because I'd hung out with enough guys who were way better than me that didn't make it either. So I wanted to sell screenplays and write novels and stuff. But I was preparing for life as an English professor because I liked the idea of teaching, but I knew I didn't want to teach like secondary education or anything. I wanted to be around students who like chose and wanted to be there. So I was like, okay, I'll teach college just in case I don't sell screenplays and novels, but I'm sure I will. Meanwhile, I'm like super high the whole time. So
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
At this point, you've dropped out. You're in full swing of addiction. At what point did the addiction? What was kind of I guess my next progressive question is was the catalyst to kind of spur on the idea of sobriety?
So it's kind of funny, a lot of people, I never wanted to get sober. I hated every time. First, there's a physical illness, by the time I was like using a needle, like needle, heroin and cocaine, speedballs, that was just kind of like, oh, this is my life now until I die. I assume it, I assume will be very soon. Right. So it was just all about this animalistic id of, okay, I'm hungry. I want a cigarette, heroin, hungry cigarette, heroin, cocaine, hungry cigarette. You know what I mean? It was just survival. I had no desires for anything outside of that. It was just, where can I sleep? What can I get from you? And that was the dirtiest couple years of my life. It was terrible. And it sounds weird to say I didn't want to get sober. Like when I'm high, I fantasize about a normal life, sure. But when I'm withdrawing, I can't, my nose is running. My legs are like racked with pain. They're twitching. My stomach's turning. I'm vomiting. I want this to stop more than anything, right? All the memories of, my dead mother and the things that I said to her right before she passed and everything I didn't do and everything I didn't become that I thought I would. It was too painful, right? All the friends that I'd hurt, the strangers that I'd hurt from stealing from them and things like that. That was an option. Make all this go away. So I ran back and forth from, wherever I was staying to the dope boy for a long time, and never had any plan to get sober. So what happened was I was dating a girl that I went to high school with, and she was also a heroin addict. And her parents, Casey's Lauder. Do you know what that is? Probably not.
No, I do not.
So there was it's a law in where I'm from, where you can force a loved one to go to treatment on pay, or they go to jail, even if they're an adult. So they did that to her, and she went to rehab, and she was kind of like, she had the car, you know what I mean? Like because she had parents still, and she had a somewhat of a life. So without her, I only made it a couple days. She was in treatment, and I was walking, because nothing's going to stop me if I need to get high. And I think I pawned like a gold pendant or something like that. God knows where I got it. I had like 20 something bucks, and I pawned that, got a little bit of dope, and I was trying to shoot up in a Taco Bell bathroom downtown. And the employees, heroin was an epidemic in my area at that time. And so they were disgusted with it. They knew what I was doing in there. They called the cops. And so the cops showed, and I waited for them. I was just sitting there trying to use. I knew they were coming. I didn't even care. I was like, where am I going to go? Who cares, right? I just want to get this in me. I want to go away mentally. Maybe it'll kill me. That'd be great. And I actually missed it, which is kind of funny. And then so I got arrested there, and I'd had some warrants and stuff for not showing up to court on other charges. And I can remember sitting in the backseat of that cruiser. And even then, all I could think of was the drugs that I didn't get to do. You know what I mean? Because they showed up too quickly. And that's all I was thinking of, is they took me there. So I went to jail for 6 months when I was 23. And that's where I kind of detoxed, I was miserable. So, and that's terrible. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, right? Because I'm sitting in this box, and it's a giant box, mind you, with 70 other men. It's a 70-man pod is what they call it. And again, I'm just this, I can't stress this enough. I'm not built for this. I'm not that kind of, you know what I mean? I wasn't raised that way. I can't fight. I'm real picky with food or whatever at the time, like it's just, even though I'd been living like an urchin for years, like I'm still not ready for this. And so I'm terrified. I'm out of my element, but also I'm severely withdrawing from a heavy amount of heroin every day for years. So just laying on a cot, no medical attention or anything. It's just laying there, sweating it out, dealing with it. And not to get into the gory details, so I'll save you all that, but it's rough, right? And then all of the images of all of my transgressions, all the people I've hurt, again, all this stuff I was describing earlier, I'm just stuck with it in jail. And it was terrible. So it took me months to even kind of start to find myself again, because I'm not working any steps or getting any kind of therapy. I'm just talking to other people who screwed their lives up, and most of them aren't mentally in a good place. But I feel like the universe or God or whatever you want to call it kind of reaches out to you any way that they can. And somehow I found a guy in there that was the childhood neighbor of my girlfriend. So I got a phone call or whatever. So I called her one day, and she's doing really well. She's down in Louisville, Kentucky now in a rehab at that time, actually wanting to be sober and experiencing sobriety and getting help through the 12 steps. And so I mentioned her name, and there's another guy in the cell that's like, so-and-so? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh, that's my neighbor. She's like my little sister, And so he took me under his wing and kind of like would give me food and protect me, and he had been in recovery before. Obviously didn't work because he's in there, but he knew some things, and he would walk me through stuff. And somebody gave me what they call the big book. You know what I mean? It's a 12-step recovery book. It's kind of like the Bible of recovery or whatever. And I read it front to back because I like to read. I read it like a novel. Didn't work. You know, I just still had this concept that when I got out, I would lay low for a little while, and then I would figure out how to drink successfully. I would figure out how to just smoke weed. You know, I understood that heroin and cocaine were an issue, but I couldn't wrap my head around never doing anything ever again. That just didn't make sense to me. You know, weed was my best friend. Alcohol was my best friend. It's like saying, hey, you're not allowed to see your brother anymore. You know, that just wouldn't compute to you. So Sarah was her name. Her mother got me a lawyer because my mom was dead and my dad was also in prison. And they got me sent to a halfway house down in Louisville, which was near where she was. And it was a 12-step based recovery house. You had to be sober to live there. You had to pay rent. And it was, even then I was like, they're going to let me smoke cigarettes and they're going to let me see her. I don't want anything else that they're offering at all. I'll just pretend. Do you know what I mean? So I got down there, and I'm a chameleon. I've been living that way my whole life. If you guys are all rock stars, I'll play guitar and grow my hair out. If you guys are all criminals, I'll cut the fence and crawl through. If, you know, whatever you need me to be to fit in, I'll be it. That's the way I've been my whole life. So they're like, you need to be sober. And so I'm like, okay, I'm sober now then. Oh, great. I'll go to these meetings with you. I'll get a sponsor. I'll work these steps, and I'm really good at school. So I'll work them so well. You know, I'll read everything you want me to read. I love reading, not a big deal. But what I didn't expect is that it worked. You know what I mean? So I was doing step one. It's like, okay, step one, you have to, admit that you're powerless over alcohol, that your life's become unmanageable. And so step one is the problem. It's twofold. It's mental. It's the thought that overrides all other thoughts. And it's also physical. You know, they taught me that I have an allergy to alcohol and drugs. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't break out in hives when I drink, right? And they're like, that's not what allergy means. Turns out the definition of an allergy is any abnormal reaction to a food, beverage, or substance. So, Josh, when you drink alcohol, likely at some point you feel a little out of control, a little dizzy, a little sick. You make a conscious decision to stop. Oh, I need to stop. I have work tomorrow, or I need to pick up my wife at 8, or whatever it is, right? That never happens to me. At no point do I feel out of control. At no point do I feel dizzy. The more I drink, the more in control I feel, the smarter I feel, the sexier I feel, the stronger I feel. And at some point, the only conscious decision I make is that we should probably get some cocaine to go along with this so we can keep drinking, right? So that's an allergy. That's an abnormal reaction, right? So that's what they taught me. And I won't go through all 12 of the steps here to bore you, but what I mean to say is that they tricked me. You know, they knew I was full of shit, and they were like, just work these steps, and you're fooling everybody. Don't worry, because they knew that it would work, and it did. You know, I woke up one day. It sounds stupid and miraculous, but it's the honest truth. I just woke up one day, and I made it to about 2:00 or so before I realized that I had no desire to drink. You know what I mean? And I was like, just going about my day, smoking a cigarette, talking to a guy, and holy shit. And and so then now I'm on fire. Now I believe I've drank the Kool-Aid. So I'm teaching the classes. I know I'm sponsoring the guys. I'm going to every meeting I can. I'm on fire for this thing. I'm paying my sober living rent. I've never paid a bill in my life. I'm so excited to do it. I have a little shitty job, and I'm so excited to have it. And they call it the pink cloud, but I'm just happy, to exist. I didn't think I would live this long, and nobody did. And I stayed down there for almost a year after I got out of jail, and until Sarah and I got pregnant with our son, and then we moved back up here.
I guess, you mentioned this earlier when you were in college, that you consumed all of these, all the alcohol, all the drugs, simply because you just kind of saw yourself as this, your childhood version of yourself that it just could never amount to enough. And I'm kind of wondering, coming sober, like what was it like to kind of come to grips with a lot of the things that, you did during the addiction phase, but also at the same time, like realizing that I guess the best way I can put it is like the end of Rocket Man, where
Mhm.
Elton John kind of has to, learn to love himself. What was it like for you to kind of learn to love Chris again?
Um, well, I want to say it was painful, but the honest answer is that I'm still learning that. I still battle self-loathing and imposter syndrome and everything that everybody deals with. It's my belief that the 12 steps would benefit 100% of the people on this planet. It's just that alcoholics have to do them on pain of death. And so for that reason, I'm grateful that I'm an alcoholic, right? So what I do as part of a 12-step program is on a daily basis, I pray when I wake up, and I plan my day ahead because I have to know, exactly where I'm going and what I'm doing. I have to look at myself and check my motives for any action, make sure that they're pure. And then when I caused harm, because it's inevitable, we're all human. When I cause harm, I have to make amends for that and promptly admit that I'm wrong. There's nothing about that manner of living that wouldn't benefit everybody, right? But so I'm really grateful that I'm a junkie. And what I mean by that is because I'll die if I don't constantly work on myself and improve as a person and try to look at my motives and admit where I was wrong. And so for that reason, otherwise I could just kind of quietly go through life being a lightweight piece of shit and be sort of miserable, which I feel is the affliction of many. Do you know what I mean? But to answer your question, I'm still full of self-loathing on more days than I care to admit. But part of the process, so step 4, what they have you do, what we have folks do is list out every person, institution, or thing with which we have a resentment, right? So it could be God, it could be church, it could be mom, dad, brother, sister, the little Susie from school that stole your pencil, a giant list of everybody that you're resentful at or ever have been, why you were resentful, what it affects. Is it your security, your pocketbook, your self-esteem, whatever, and then what my part in it actually was. So it's a 4-column thing. So I get to work through every negative emotion that I have throughout my whole life, right? And then I list out all my fears, and then I list out all of my sex conduct, because sex is a huge thing that messes people up, unfortunately, right? It's a normal human thing that we all have major issues with for the most part. And then you share that with your sponsor, and it takes a few hours. You go over all of that, and then you track your defects that are patterns throughout your life. And ultimately, through step 8 and 9, you make a list of people to make amends to. And so everybody that I stole from, everybody that I lied to, every company that I took from, all that stuff, it's all out there. And one by one, I go to them and I say, not, I'm sorry, because they've heard that my whole life, right? That's an addict's refrain. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take your wallet. Can I sleep here though? Whatever. Right. So you're used to saying sorry your whole life. So you don't say that. You say, hey, I'd like to meet with you. And if they agree to, you say, look, I'm sober now. I'm in such and such program. It hurts me that I've hurt you. This is what I did. And then after you list out everything you can remember, you say, did I leave anything out? And let them speak. And then you say, is there anything else that you'd like to add? And they say, yeah, I'm pissed off that you, whatever. Right. And you listen to all of that. And at the end, you say, what can I do to make it right? And then you do whatever it is that you can do to make it right. And sometimes they say nothing, fuck off, right? But the book tells me that I've cleaned up my side of it. And people, I understand if you have an addict in your life and like this sounds like complete shit to you, but I've done everything I can in that situation to make it right. So I'm cleared of it. You know what I mean? And the book says we owe an amends, but we don't crawl, right? I'm still a child of God. I don't bow or scrape before anyone. So I walk up with my head held high and I tell somebody exactly what I've done wrong. And then I'm willing to make it right. And that as long as I am willing, you feel good about it, you know? And if you owe somebody money, you don't show up to an amends without money, because that's dumb, right? You owe somebody $500, you better show up with at least a couple $100 and then a plan to pay them every week until it's done. So over the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to make amends to hundreds of people. And so, you know, that stuff doesn't bother me anymore. You know what I mean? That's how that it works, I guess. And to answer your question in a really long way.
Yeah, and I'm, now being, 10 years removed from that, now you are a father, a husband, content creator. How has a lot of that stuff affected your mental health during the sobriety journey?
Like the content creation and being a father,
Just kind of like, all of the
normal life
positive, because
stuff.
it's yeah, like normal life. Like it just kind of seems like a lot of, the things that you've gone through, the journey that we've spent the last hour and a half talking about has been, you know, it seems like you're in a better place now. I'm just kind of wondering about like how those elements in particular have affected your mental health during the sobriety.
You know, it's I don't know. Sometimes I don't feel so when I get sober, all I've done is graduate to normal life, which is a huge step for me. You know, in the beginning, I'm grateful I'm alive. I'm grateful that I have bills. I get a place to sleep every night. My fridge always has food. I got Netflix. I didn't even know about Netflix when I got, you know what I mean? When I first got sober, like Netflix was just coming out and shit. So I'm like, this is awesome. And they made Game of Thrones into a series while I was in jail. That's amazing. It's a show now because it was just a book that I was a fan of when I was a kid. But also there's still like, you don't get the job that you want. You get sick, people die, friends do stupid things, you make bad decisions, you split up with your son's mother, like all the stuff that everybody deals with still happens. I'm not immune to any of that. So there's been
Sure.
peaks and valleys, just like anybody. My dad died when I was 2 years sober, and he was actually living with Sarah and I when my son was just first born, and he is struggling really bad with his mental issues. He was 62 at the time, and didn't have a penny to his name. He was so miserable. He kept trying to, we had a little condo that her mother was letting us live in for like $400 a month. And so we had a little garage that was detached, and I caught him trying to hang himself in my garage, and I'm only a year and a half, 2 years sober, but that's what I mean is like, so life's still life. Like there's always shit like that, but I have different coping skills now. So I talk to him, I tell him I love him or whatever. And I go to a meeting and hang out with a couple other guys that are in sobriety that are around my wavelength and my sponsor. And I tell them about it. And I help somebody else who's only got 2 days sober, who would love to have a garage to have issues in, and so that helps me. I'm like, oh, that's where I come from. That's how bad it can be. Okay. I'm just grateful my son's healthy, that, okay, I can do this. You know what I mean? And so I just have different skills to deal with that stuff that, where I don't have to resort to using or drinking, but there's still rough days, man. And especially as somebody who wants to be an artist, I'm sure, that's a complete mind fuck of its own, where you just, I'm stupid, nobody likes me and it's never going to happen. And that's a daily thing that I deal with. So
Yeah, I mean, definitely like one of your TikToks recently, you talked about celebrating hitting 20 K followers, and you just talking about like how anyone that has been in content creation for any amount of time, and you're constantly trying to hit that viral status. There's something about the euphoria of hitting, or the potential of hitting, a viral status that it just kind of means that like you're validated as an individual, or that you've made it, or that you have value, or that you have worth, and it just constantly feels like you're screaming into a void, essentially.
yes, I've tried most of my sobriety. I've tried different things. Like I said, I've had a few podcasts. I started a whole website once where I was like, nobody will hire because I'm a writer. I identify as a writer more than anything. And so nobody will hire me to write their, to review movies. I'll start my own movie blog website. Somebody started this site, damn it. So I paid for the domain, and I paid graphic designers, and I hired my own writers, and I did that for 6 months, and nobody read that shit either, and and I made a bunch of short films and sent them off to festivals, and they all said no, and blah blah blah. Everybody deals with that, right? But I've never stuck with anything, I guess, as much as I think I have. And so I'll share this with you. I don't know how much time we have, but if I don't know what kind of stuff you're into, but I got this book called The Artist's Way. And it's basically like a 12-step program, but for creativity. And the theory behind the book is that everybody's creative. It's God's will that you're creative. And therefore it is right and it is good that you should do so. And so if you're either a creative person or a blocked creative, and there is no other kind of person. And so they make you to write 3 pages in a journal every morning. It's called the morning pages. And there's all these exercises and thought processes. And that's where the TikTok came from, was my thoughts while I was doing that. And so I just started posting a couple times a day, and then writing in my journal every morning, and starting to write screenplays and stuff again. I've been really excited, and it started kind of working. And it might be that book. I don't fucking know. I think you should check it out. It's called The Artist's Way. I really recommend it.
I will have to definitely give that a listen. It's like you put in the work, and sometimes you don't get anything. Like I look at some of the YouTube videos that I'm like, oh, this one's gonna get like a decent number of hits, and then like it's just like the thing that I thought no one would care about gets the most hits, and I'm just like, okay,
that's how my
don't
TikToks
understand this.
I'll put so much effort into some of them and be like, dude, this is fire. Like, and it'll flop completely. And then I'll have something that's been in my drafts for 2 weeks that I'm about to delete. And for some reason, I'll just say, fuck it, and publish it instead. And I'll check my phone a few hours later, and it's got thousands of views and all these comments. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So it's just, you never know, and it's our own warped perception, but it's also partially because it's all bullshit. And so I've thought a little bit about, as happy as I am about the success of the TikTok, and it's not like a huge TikTok. I mean, it's not to that point yet or anything, but it could be. And it's like, but at the same time, I worry, because there is that dopamine hit when something goes viral. And again, I have a disease that anything that feels good, I want more. And so it's hard for me to tell, am I working really hard toward a dream? Am I like that story? Am I like the Will Smith movie of the future, right? Where like, this is just a guy working really hard toward a goal? Or am I an addict chasing something that feels good? Do you know what I mean? Like, I can't tell the difference. And is this going to harm me? Should I delete TikTok?
No, dude, I absolutely get that, 100%. I shared my story a couple years ago when we did an episode on pornography addiction.
Sure.
And kind of talked about like how transitioning out of that addiction, and I'm sure that, I've talked to other addicts that have kind of understood this, like there is one thing that it replaces another, essentially. Like you're never without an addiction, you're never without it. And so like I've had to place barriers in my own life where I'm like, I'm not in the right headspace for horror, so I can't watch anything or listen or read anything that has to do with this genre, or I just sat down and binged an entire season of a Netflix series. Like I have to go do something now because I feel lethargic, or there's always these kinds of things that you have to put barriers on, and know your limits, whether it's as a creator or as an individual, because at the end of the day, everything that you're doing and consuming is affecting your mental health.
Absolutely. And that's the thing about, the TikTok specifically is, it sucks you right in. It's an algorithm designed to kidnap your attention, right? And so I'm on it for what I perceive is business reasons, and but it's hours now, and I'm like, oh, I feel like complete shit, and the day's gone by, or what's worse, I found myself, like we talked about earlier, jokingly, but sometimes it's quite dark and it's funny, a product of our times. But I'll look at a video and see that it flopped, and like the feeling that I get, and it's embarrassing to even admit, but it's like your worth as a person feels tied to this. Like right after one gets 2.2 million views, it's just like anything else in life. The cocaine fades within a few hours. The heroin fades within a few hours. You buy a brand new car. It's great until someone pulls up in a nicer car, right? It's, you watch porn. It's only great till right after, and now you feel worse. It's the same way with that. It's like you get a viral video and it's like, oh, I am smart. I am cool. This is going to work, until the very next video flops completely. And then somehow you're just like, it was a lie. I was a piece of shit the whole time. I knew it, and it just starts all over again. It's actually pretty ridiculous, the human cycle. So what I've found is you have to put your value and your worth in something beyond all of that. And this is where I'm going to sound crazy, potentially, but the whole point of the 12 steps is to lead you to a power greater than yourself, is what it says. Right. And I was an atheist when I got sober. So I was like, psh, and which is why I hated the whole idea of it. But I found that I do believe in a power greater than myself, and it's a God of my own understanding. And that is where I have to put my worth and my value, because that's something that, the new car, the TikTok, none of that shit, even like the death of a loved one, none of that can touch that, and I prayed every morning and every night for 10 years now. In the first few years, I didn't even believe anybody was listening. But I read Soren Kierkegaard is a Danish philosopher, and he said, prayer is not meant to influence the actions of God, but rather to change the mind of the one who prays. And that, I got with that immediately, because it's like, okay, God's not Santa Claus. The act of prayer is meant to help to focus my mind on another plane of understanding, on what's really important, even if it's just the present moment, right? So I understood like the utilitarianism of prayer, and that's when I got with it. But there's times nowadays where I do think something's listening, and that's nice.
No, I mean, I think that I'm probably one of, I won't say one of few, but like I'm someone that does understand that, because, when I went through my depression, like it was God and music that essentially like saved me from, depression and wanting to kill myself. And even now, it's still like that is the first thing I do in the morning. The first half hour of my day is dedicated to praying and reading the Bible. And so, and I've used victims as a platform a multitude of times to, talk about the Bible and mental health in certain places. So, and I fully agree with what you said. It's because of how fleeting the Bible talks about how like fleeting life is, and how we're basically life is no more than a blade of grass. Like we're here today and we're thrown into the fire tomorrow. And I think a great example is like you go think back to like the spring movie slate of 2019, where you had like Avengers, like there was another Disney movie, there was you know, like Terminator and Aladdin and Lion King, and it was a massive movie year. But you think about the release date and just how quickly your attention shifted constantly. And I think that that's kind of the things that we, in terms of, things that we're passionate about, like that's really, you talk about like TikToks and YouTube videos and podcasts and all of those things that, you love and you're passionate, like they are literally fleeting because our attention is constantly shifting because of social media and just how fast
Yeah.
life seems to be moving nowadays.
Yeah. It's all bullshit, man. And what's real is like my wife's downstairs and like she's supportive of all this stuff. And I have to be, and she's pregnant with our daughter. And, that's the shit that matters. You know what I mean? It's just, and all this other stuff it's something that I do for fun. But none of it matters. The art that I do that really, really means something to me is with a pen and a paper in my kitchen. And, nobody reads the shit, but that's the stuff that's important to me. The only reason I even do TikTok is, like as a platform for my other stuff, is my hope. You know what I mean? But if I feel like it's going to harm my sobriety or my mental health, or God forbid, my family, it's gone, just because nothing's worth all that. I've been to a place where I have to remind myself of this constantly. Life gets busy quick. And then all of a sudden I'm mad about an interest rate. Oh, 3.9 APR. It's bullshit. And at some point I'll start laughing maniacally because I can remember distinctly having nowhere to sleep, not a penny in my pocket, with just the fervent desire to lay my head down and watch TV and have some food in the fridge and a toothbrush and not have to worry about who might find me. You know what I mean? Like that's all I wanted from the world for years. And now I would dare be this upset over an interest rate. You know what I mean? Like so I'll start laughing and be like, that's probably going to be fine.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly perspective changes.
Yeah,
it's always kind of been like one of the core values for like when we do speaking engagements is like depression. Like, yeah, like I'm going to live with terrible circumstances, but it's only going to be for a short period of time. And there are things like medicine and therapy and counseling and community that can really change the perspective on depression, but also at the same time, like before those things even enter into my atmosphere, I have I woke up today, I have air in my lungs, I'm healthy, I have a roof over my head. Like there's so much to kind of really change the perspective on your outlook on life. And sometimes it just takes sitting down and actually doing that perspective.
Absolutely.
All right, so I think that is going to do it for us on this episode of Victims and Villains. Where can people find streaming things online and movies are therapy?
Well, multiple places you can find. I'm on Twitter at Movies Are Therapy. I'm on TikTok at Movies Are Therapy. And then you can find the Streaming Things podcast wherever you get your podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, all that good stuff.
All right. Well, you guys can find me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow all of our content. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Patreon, YouTube, and wherever you guys get your podcasts from. And you guys also at the same time can go to victimsandvillains.net where you guys can find links to all of that. More podcasts like this, movie reviews, our Horrific Hope 2022 Film Festival lineup, and our mental health resource library, most of all. So, Chris, thank you so much for sharing your story, bro.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. I hope you can stitch something usable out of it. I'm sorry for the bad internet connection, but I did have a blast.
Yeah, man. So until next time, stay classy.